Hello and welcome to my Chessable Move Trainer course on the positional bishop e2 in the Najdorf. This video sync upgrade will pay particular attention to the problem moves that students have been facing in the last period since the course has been published. So the bishop e2 in the Najdorf arises after the moves e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, cd, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6, the typical starting Najdorf position, and now the move bishop e2. The move bishop e2 will always be popular. It's a move that will always be favored by players who prefer to get a playable Sicilian position with white without too much theory and memorization involved. It became popular, I would say, in the 60s by the efforts of Efim Geller, who at that time was an e4 player and favored the bishop e2 move. He had some memorable victories against even Bobby Fischer. And not surprisingly, in the late 70s and 80s, it became a favorite of Anatoly Karpov. And I say not surprisingly because Geller was his second at that time. So obviously he passed all his knowledge and analysis to Karpov. And this continued until the mid-80s, I would say, when Karpov famously lost the last game, 24th match game against Kasparov in their match in 1985, which crowned Kasparov a champion. And ever since then, Karpov made a big switch in his repertoire, switching to d4. But the move remained popular still because other players took the mantle. So it is popular even today. It has been played even by Magnus Carlsen and pretty much everybody else. What is important to know that it is different than the other lines in the Najdorf in the sense that it's the positional treatment of the Najdorf. Here we deal with we respond to bishop e2 by the typical Najdorf move e5. As you have seen in the introduction, the move a6 is a preparation not only of b5 but also of the move e5 by preventing the move knight db5, hitting the d6 pawn. Quick note, the move e6 would lead to the classical Scheveningen, and it was in fact Kasparov's choice in that famous 24th match game. So the move now, the main move, knight b3, but it's debatable whether it should be called the main move because recently the move knight f3 was sort of brought up back from oblivion by none other but Magnus Carlsen, who found several interesting ideas in it. The good news here is that actually you can rest assured that black players have already found reliable ways how to deal with this move knight f3. So let's take a look at it. Knight f3. The idea of the move knight f3 is that it leaves the b3 square free, so that later on white will try to play bishop c4 and bishop b3, trying to increase control of over the d5 square. So that is the main idea of the move, yes. And the best reaction for black in this position, it starts with bishop e7, the normal developing move, and after bishop g5, we start to see the beginning of white's plan. He intends to eliminate the knight of an f6, which is controlling the d5 square, and then by playing bishop c4, bishop b3, possibly putting a knight on d5 to obtain positional grip on the position. Additionally, the knight on f3, which is not the best placed piece in white's position, will be maneuvered, if possible, via d2, f1, e3, or d2, maybe sometimes c4, e3. The ideal square for the knight is e3 in these positions because from there it controls the squares f5 and d5. So, since white wants to take on f6, and this is fight for the d5 square, black's logical move is bishop e6. Now, you may ask yourself, why not knight d7? Knight d7 is another theoretically valid move, but it has the drawback that it does not control the a2 g8 diagonal, thus allowing white to put the bishop on c4 without any impediments. So therefore bishop e6. Now black wants to continue knight d7 and connect the knights, so white is forced to take on f6, and after bishop f6 he castles. Now an important moment arises. In this position, black would ideally want to have the knight on b8, on f6, or even on b6 to control d5. But in order to do that, the knight needs to pass via the d7 square. Hence, black's next move, bishop e7. So there is no need to rush with castling, because black is not forced to evacuate the king from the center yet. And by bishop e7, he is defending the d6 pawn and preparing the knight d7 move, from where the knight can go either to b6 or to f6. Knight d5. White uses the moment that the d5 square is still not enough controlled by black, and plays knight d5, not only placing a knight on dominant central square, but also enabling the move bishop c4 and later maybe bishop b3, establishing control over the d5 square. This is an important moment, I think, where I should explain a bit the importance of the d5 square. I also touched upon this in the introduction, but this line is in a way characteristic one, because it shows the importance of the control of the d5 square, both for white and black. From black's perspective, it is very important to control that square so that white's piece there is never left unattended. The second thing is that taking on d5 in this particular line is almost I say never good, because white can easily land the piece on d5, and this generally is not favorable for black. There are some concrete lines where this will work, as we will see shortly, but generally what black is trying to do is controlling d5 and then playing around this knight on d5, as we will see in the analysis. In a way, this is similar to the Sveshnikov variation, where white has undisputed control over d5, but black successfully plays around that knight. Therefore, the problem move that some students have tried here, the move bishop d5, is an impulsive and unfortunately wrong reaction, because after queen d5, white will have absolute control of the d5 square. So black will need time and to maneuver the knight again to b6 or f6 to control it further. So white, for the time being, will have unopposed control over the d5 square. Therefore, the move d5, the move bishop d5 would be wrong. With all this in mind, the move knight d7 is only a natural one to make. As I explained, the knight wants to go to f6 or to b6. White continues with his plan of bishop c4, strengthening the control over the d5 square, and now rook c8, hitting the bishop. Yeah, hitting the bishop, finishing development. Again, no rush to castle, because black is not forced to do so, and takes the time to get all his pieces in play. And now queen e2, defending the bishop. The alternative is bishop b3, is still a natural move, getting the bishop out of harm's way on the c file. And now an important move is the move knight c5. A situation where students have played moves like b5 or bishop d5. It is important to explain again, perhaps, why bishop d5 is wrong. Because after bishop d5 by white, white again has absolute control over the d5 square. Even if black then attacks that bishop, he will never really threaten to take it, because after queen d5 we will have a typical good knight bad bishop situation, even though sometimes these positions are playable for black, but often it is just better not to enter there. The move b5, while possible, it's not ideal because the move actually suggested knight c5 is more in strategic accordance with the requirements of the position, because in an indirect way, black is fighting for the control of the d5 square. How? By attacking the piece that controls that square. Additionally, okay, the pawn on e4 is hanging, so after rook e1, black takes on b3. So the point is to destroy a piece that controls the d5 square. And after ab, bishop d5, now we see an exception in a way to what I just said previously, that black usually avoids taking everything on d5 when white can land a piece there. But here the concrete justification is that the pawn on c2 is hanging. So the game becomes more open, more dynamic, and white cannot really consolidate his grip on d5 because black has active counterplay. After queen b7, now it's high time to castle. In a way, it is a problem move, this castling, and because students have sometimes been impatient by taking on b2, but it just loses, unfortunately, due to the check on c6, and then queen c3, trapping the bishop on b2. The rook on b2. Therefore, castle. The good thing for black is that the b2 pawn will not run away, and black can capture it at any moment. So after queen a6, rook b2. The material is equal, and the good thing for black here is that there are open files on the queen side, where he can, which he can use to attack the b3 pawn. The b3 pawn is a passed one, but it won't go very far. The point being that, for example, after rook b1 takes, now the rook is behind the passed pawn, wants to advance, etc. Black has the very nice move queen a8, attacking the queen and hitting the e4 pawn. Then the rook can come to b8 to further control the passed b pawn. The bishop can be activated either by pushing d5 at some point, or by the maneuver bishop d8, bishop b6, which will, in one hand, activate the bishop by putting it on the g1 a7 diagonal, from where it hits f2, and also from b6 it will successfully block the advance of the b pawn. Please note the awkward position of the knight on f3. If the knight had been on d5, it would have been a completely different situation, and most likely white would have been simply winning. But the fact that the knight cannot really get to d5 makes the position acceptable and good for black. So going back to the move queen e2 instead of bishop b3, and now knight b6. Oops, sorry, knight b6. Again, the fight is always around the d5 square. Now the knight is hitting not only the knight on d5, but again the bishop on c4, therefore forcing white to take on b6. Why is white forced to take on b6? Because after bishop b3, black will take on d5, and now we have a situation which is very important for the proper understanding of the knight of structures after e5, which is that black will always take on d5 when he can force a white pawn arriving there. So in this case, this is so, because after bishop b3, knight d5, whichever way white takes, either with a pawn immediately or with a bishop, where after a further exchange bishop d5, e5, we have a very favorable transformation of the pawn structure with the white pawn arriving on d5, basically giving black a central and kingside majority, with the pawn on e5 being particularly strong, with further very easy play of pushing that majority by f5, e4, etc. The bishop on e7 will further be activated by putting it on f6 or g5, depending on circumstances. The typical reaction to white's advance on the queen side would be to place the pawns on b6 and a5 to effectively stop the c5 break in the future. Therefore, white is forced to take on b6, and after queen b6, bishop b3, protecting the b2 pawn, and finally black can take the time to castle. So we have in a way, typical middle game position where the battle still rages over the control of the d5 square. White's next move, rook fd1, is only natural in that direction, controlling the d5 square. Still, black is very comfortable here, apart from the pair of bishops. He has very good play because all his pieces are well placed, and in perspective, he has active active ideas like the f5 push, which we will see in a short while. This has been played in the game Caruana-Grischuk from 2017, and now I suggest an improvement over that game, over Grischuk's play, which is the move Queen c5. The point of Queen c5 is to increase the pressure on the c2 pawn, so now bishop b3 may be a threat, and also to liberate the b pawn. So the idea of b5, a5 is also another active idea black has at his disposal, harassing the bishop on b3. So c3, securing the pawn, and now b5. As I mentioned in my earlier comments, White's main problem in this position is the awkward position of the knight on f3. Ideally, he would like to put it on e3, when he would be just doing great, because he would come to d5, and White would achieve his dream of having absolute control of the d5 square. However, that is not possible, because the knight rerouting via e1, c2, e3 will always be met by the move bishop g5, controlling the e3 square. So we will see in the suggested line now how this happens. After b5, okay, White continues with knight e1, attempting knight c2, knight e3 maneuver, and now a5, continuing with the plan. Please note that all exchanges on e6 are favorable for black, because after fe6 he obtains several things. First of all, the e6 pawn eliminates the weaknesses of d5 and f5, therefore black structure improves, and also opens the f-file for counterplay against f2. So knight c2, and now g6. What I'm trying to explain here is that this counterplay based on f5, very similar to the Sveshnikov, is very powerful in these positions, even if the knight does make it to d5. Therefore, the g6 move is a preparation. It is in a way a problem move, because students have tried the move rook fd8, which again, it's a sensible move, but it doesn't do anything in terms of creating counterplay in this position. So it's good to keep the rook on f8, having in mind the f5 pawn push. So g6, knight e3, and bishop g5. This is very concrete, because I explained that normally when the black can prevent the arrival of the knight on e3 by putting the bishop on g5 earlier, but here this line illustrates the strength of black's counterplay, even if that happens. So now the threat is to take on e3. So in a way, if White wants to be consistent with his previous play, he should go knight d5. But now we see everything falls in place for black, and we see the whole idea. First a4, kicking the bishop out from the nice spot on b3 from where it controls d5, and after bishop c2, f5. Now we see the true power of black's counterplay. The d5 square is well controlled, so even though White landed the knight there, the knight is rather impotent, because it's not doing anything. The bishop in g5 is very active, preventing the knight coming back from e3, and f5 now threatens to open the f-file. So fe4 can be a possibility, and it's not really clear how White should continue here. To suggest a move for White is kind of difficult already. So this line is a very good illustration of the dynamic possibilities in the positions, you could say the calmer positions, when White is trying to play in a restrictive mode by maneuvering a knight to d5 and playing for the weakness of the d5 square. It's a good illustration because, similar to the Sveshnikov Sicilian, it shows that black can successfully play around that knight on d5. And this is the typical way to do it. Normally the bishop goes to g5 and the f file is opened by the move f5. This rounds up the analysis of the knight f3 line, and I would suggest that you pay special attention to it, because apart from the actual theory and the way the line should be treated, it also introduces a lot of instructive moments for the understanding of these positions and structures. I would say this is one of the rare lines where white actually manages a knight on d5, but as the analysis showed, it doesn't bring much to white anyway. So going back to the main move, knight b3. Okay, bishop e7. The typical developing move, but also a precise move order, because, for example, in the 60s and 70s, the move bishop e6 was played regularly, with the idea of immediately playing knight bd7. But then it was determined that the move f4 immediately gives white an advantage. So therefore, the most precise move order is to start with bishop e7. Now again, not surprisingly, white has a wide array of options. The main move traditionally has been the short castle, but white has tried different approaches as well. So let's take a look at them one by one. Bishop g5 is a move which we already saw in the knight f3 line. The idea is similar. To take on f6 and establish control over d5, but there are two major differences. First, the knight is on b3 and not on f3. Therefore, the maneuver of bishop c4 is not that good, because the bishop will be kind of stranded on c4 and can't drop back to b3. And the second difference is that the king is still in the center, and white has the possibility of castling queenside. And this is actually the idea that started the popularity of this line with bishop g5 sometime in the 90s. However, since then, black found reliable ways how to deal with this line. So the reaction is the same. Bishop g5 wants to take on f6, the knight that controls d5. So what black must do is increase the control over d5, but the typical move, bishop e6. The threat after bishop e6, as always, is knight d7 to connect the knights. So white must take this moment to take on f6, and after bishop f6, play the move queen d3. This is the idea. White prepares long castle, and then possibly g3, f4, and some advance on the king side with if black is not dangerous, some attack. Good for memorization is that black's reaction is the same. He wants, as in the knight f3 line, he wants to play the move knight d7, but in order to do that, he needs to defend the d6 pawn first. Therefore, bishop e7 and long castle. White just continues with his plan, but black does the same by playing knight d7. And now g3. The idea is to go f4. Note that after the exchange of the dark square bishops, white is a bit sensitive on the dark square, so he puts his pawns on dark squares by playing g3, f4, thus in a way limiting the damage, even though at some point later, if he pushes f5, the bishop may as well have an exit via g5, but then again white may play for h4 and try to limit that damage. Note that the move knight d5 is rather harmless, because here black can actually take. In a way, he's forced to take because white threatens to take on e7 and take on d6. But after bishop d5, queen d5, even though white established, you could say, for the time being, absolute control of the d5 square, this is only temporary, because after queen c7, king b1 and castles, black will soon enough take control of the d5 square by probably b5, knight b6, or sometimes even knight f6. And he will have control over the d5 square. White's problem here is the really awkward position of his light pieces, the knight on b3 and the bishop on e2. Ideally, the knight on b3 would be either on c3 or e3, and the bishop on e2 would rather be on b3, but this is impossible to obtain. So this is very good already for black, who just starts pushing the queenside pawns and start play against white's king on the queenside, whereas white can't really do the same because the pawns are so far on the king side, and his pieces are not really well placed for a king side advance. Therefore, the only decent try for white here is the move g3 and now b5. So a typical move, threatening bishop c4 at some point perhaps, and also moving the pawn before the knight arrives to b6. F4. Now white continues with his play, and rook c8. Now this is, it may appear it's a logical developing move, putting the rook on the open c file, etc. But in fact it's a hidden threat that it introduces. The rook on c8 eyes the knight on c3, and probably you know in the Sicilian the typical sacrifice on c3, exchange sacrifice on c3 is a powerful motive black has in his arsenal. And we will see the idea here shortly. f5, bishop c4, the queen moves, and bishop e2. And here we see the idea. This move forces white to take with the knight, because if he takes with the queen after rook c3, bishop c3, we see the idea, the hidden idea of the move rook c8. Now, please note that this exchange sacrifice does not win, far from it. It's a pure exchange sacrifice, so black has invested material. But what he has gained with this sacrifice is long-term positional factors. First of all, the weakness of the structure, white's structure on the queen side. Also, this meaning that the white king will always be less safe. Then again, easy play. The knight can come to b6, from there to c4 or a4. The queen will come to c7. Black will castle. The rook will come to c8, pressuring the c3 pawn, which probably long term will be lost if black manages to put queen c7, rook c8, knight a4. The bishop can be activated via g5, sometimes even via d8, b6. The queenside pawns can be pushed further, a5, a4. So all this gives such smoothness to black's play that this exchange sacrifice is a natural one for Sicilian players, and one that gives excellent play for black. This is a very unpleasant position to play with white, therefore he's well advised to avoid it and take on e2 with the knight. And now a5. In a way, this has been maybe a problem move for some students, because they have tried to play instead of a5 short castle, knight b6, but the move a5 is the most flexible one in this position. Additionally, it introduces the threat of a4 harassing the knight on b3, whereas the moves like short castle or knight b6 feel a bit premature, because short castle, for example, maybe invites some g4, h4 and so on, whereas the knight b6, which most likely will be played, prevents the move a5, because then a5, the knight on b3 controls the a5 square. So therefore it's best to start with a5, threatening a4, maybe sometimes even a3, depends, or then a5, a4, b4 and a3, etc. Further advancing black's queenside play, and then black will decide where to put the knight and when to castle. Obviously, this is a very good position for black. His queenside plane is rolling. So this shows that the line with bishop g5, popular in the 90s, has effectively been dealt with the plan we just analyzed. Bishop e3 is a flexible move. It's a flexible move because it develops the bishop and allows still for the possibility of moving the queen and casting queenside if black is not precise in his move order. For the time being, just black develops with bishop e6, the typical move. controlling the d5 square, preparing knight d7. If you feel like looking at aesthetics in the position, the file looks pretty neat in this moment. Very, very symmetrical. And now, the typical here, not the typical, but the most popular move lately has been the move queen d3. It's a multi-purpose move. It defends the e4 pawn, preparing knight d5, and also, in some cases, prepares long castle. However, if black is precise, the long castle will not really happen. The move knight d5 immediately is possible. It owes to the fact that black cannot take on e4 because of the weakness of the b6 square. Therefore, if knight d5, black should deal with it by playing knight d7. Now e4 is threatened, so white is more or less forced to play queen d3, and we have a transposition. Note that taking the bishop on e7 is not really dangerous, because after queen e7, e4 is still hanging, and black will push d5 soon enough. Therefore, the best move here for white is queen d3 with a transposition. So going back to queen d3, yeah. Or before analyzing the move queen d3, let's take a look at the latest actually idea in this position, which is the move h4. Now, nowadays you shouldn't really be surprised by moves like h4 and g4 at any stage in the opening. It has been one of the major opening revolutions of the 21st century thanks to the rise of the engines, that people can try h4 and g4 in pretty much any opening in any position and then check with engines whether the move is good enough or not. Here the move is possible, and it has been one of the latest tries white has in this position. Luckily enough, black's reaction to it is rather simple, because he just replies symmetrically by playing h5. It's a good move, h5, because another of the, you could say, the revolutions in the Najdorf, in this case of the late 90s and early noughties, has been the solidity of black's position after the move h5, which has the idea to prevent white's easy kingside expansion by g4. And in this case, just by fixing the move, fixing the pawn on h4 and securing the g4 square, black has a relatively good play. However, it is very important to note here that the move knight d5, which we just discussed in the position without the pawns on h4 and h5, the move knight d5 in this position must be met by the capture of bishop d5. Now, let's clarify the differences. It is always important how to take on d5. We will tackle this question in various lines. And here, for example, even though sometimes it's good for black to take with the knight and preserve the bishop pair, unfortunately, this doesn't work here, because knight d5, e5, and when the bishop moves, the pawn on h5 is hanging. The second question, why not knight d7 as in the position without the pawns on h4 and h5? Now, the difference is that after knight d7, queen e7, when we said that the pawn on e4 is hanging and black will push through d5, it is awkward here. Let's just put it on the board. It is awkward here because white has the annoying pin bishop g5. And now we see the difference with the pawn on h5. Black can no longer attack that bishop by h6. And this is a bit unpleasant for black. Therefore, the move knight d4 must be met by bishop by bishop d5, and after e5, the move knight d7, finishing development. And now we have another typical situation for the understanding of the Najdorf. We will also see something similar without the moves h4, h5 later on. And I will just say what I will probably repeat later. This typical situation is that black has the kingside central majority, with the e5 pawn forming 4 against white's 3, f2, g2, h4. And white, on the other hand, has 4 against 3 on the queen side. What is important in these positions is to be very careful to play the moves b6 and a5 in time. This is the basic defensive and most solid defensive structure for black on the queen side, which effectively stops white's queen side expansion. It also secures the c5 square for the knight. So c4, let's continue the analysis of the position. c4 expanding, yeah, and now rook c8. It is encouraging that in this position students have had problem moves, even though in this case take this problem moves with a grain of salt, because they have tried moves like b6 and a5. I say encouraging because both moves show good understanding of the position. Students have understood the importance of the b6, a5 moves in this structure, and they have tried to play them immediately. The move rook c8, the suggested move rook c8, is perhaps a tad more precise, because the reason is that there is no immediate need for the moves b6 and a5 at this point. The rook comes to its natural c file, and also it discourages plans with long castle, because if long castle, then b5 can come in very strongly. Now a4, and now this is the critical moment, definitely, because a4 introduces the threat of a5. If white manages to push a5, then he will maneuver the knight from b3 to d2 most likely, then he'll get b4, the knight will come back to b3, and then he'll push through c5, and this will give white really good play on the queen side. Therefore, the vital move would be the move a5. And now black, this just ensures dark square control for black and almost permanent defense of the queen side against white's queen side expansion. Yeah, knight d2, and now b6, finalizing the defensive setup. Now the knight can come to c5 if required, and then black will slowly start to push his own majority on the king side. Possible idea can be playing g6, king f8, king g7, just to give you an idea how to solve the position of castling, because the h5 pawn is hanging. The rook can remain on h8, yes, then the knight can move from f6, f5 can be pushed, and so on and so on. So this is what happens in the line after h4. Now going back to queen d3, knight d7. It is important to finish development first and not castle, because as I said, one of the ideas of queen d3 is to allow long castle by white. So castling short would be premature, because castling short would just allow white to start to go long castle and then continue with g4, g5, even sacrificing that g pawn if necessary. And now knight d5. The second idea of the queen d3 move, securing the defending the e4 pawn and pushing, putting the knight on d5. And now bishop d5. This time forced, because knight d5 just leaves the bishop trapped on e6, so bishop d5 needs to be played, and after ed, rook c8. Again, we have more or less the same thing, but without the pawns on h4, h5. Rook c8 important because it discourages long castle. The rook is already on the c file, and then black can continue by b5, knight b6, knight c4 with rich queenside play. Important again, don't castle, because g4 is very strong then. g4, g5, and white manages to quickly start his kingside play. So rook c8. It's a flexible move, preventing white's long castle, and also not determining the position of the black king yet. Only after white has played c4, now short castle can be played, because with c4 the white's plans with long castle are not really possible, because b5 would be strong. Again, students have tried the moves b6, a5, which is again encouraging, because they have shown the good understanding by stopping in a way white's queenside expansion. They are fine. Both moves are fine, just that there is no need for them just yet. Yeah, so castle. I would say as a maybe tip is that you play b6 or a5 whenever white threatens either c5 or to put something on a5, a piece or a pawn. So only in these situations you play a move like b6 or a5 to stop those. This is as a general tip. Otherwise, you just continue with normal play, like in this case, short castle. So, short castle, and now knight e8. Again, nothing wrong with b6, a5, just that there is no need for it right now. So, like I said, you play b6 and a5 whenever white threatens actually c5 or putting something on a5. The move knight e8 is a multi-purpose move for black. It introduces the strategic idea of bishop g5, exchanging the dark squared bishops, and also frees the way for the f-pawn. So black can play f5 and expand on the king side and in the center. So queen d2. Again, a multi-purpose move. It prevents bishop g5, but also don't forget to look in the other direction. It controls the a5 square, therefore threatening knight a5. Therefore, if you had been careful, you would know what to play, the move b6. So, normally it is white's move that hints whether a move on the queen side like b6 or a5 should be played. In this case, queen d2, threaten knight a5, therefore b6. Rook ac1, normal move, putting the rook on the c file, supporting the c pawn, but after a5, we see once again how resilient this b6 a5 structure is, which makes it almost impossible for white to create something quick on the queen side. In case you're worried that it weakens b5 c6, you should relax a bit about it, because it's very, very difficult for white to take advantage of these squares. Okay, the knight from b3, for example, can be maneuvered by a1, c2, a3, b5, and it gets to b5. But then again, ask yourself, what does it do there? It attacks d6, but d6 is always well defended by black's pieces. And apart from that, the knight just stands nicely there, and that's it. So there is no practical use of it from the knight coming to b5. This is what, knight a1, this is what white did in the game we are following. In fact, we are following a game by Mamedjarov. Knight a1 with the maneuver I just mentioned, and just black continues with his typical play f5. The threat obviously is to play f4 and win the bishop. Right? So f3, and now f4. Now, a word of caution for the move f4. It can only be played if you're guaranteed to exchange the dark squared bishops. Otherwise, it would not be a good move, because f4 fatally weakens the light squares and leaves you with a bad bishop. The light squares can be controlled by the knights, but the bad bishop cannot be exchanged anymore. So f4 is fine, because after bishop f2, black can follow up with bishop h4, exchanging that bishop. And this is the importance of to understand that f4 is good only when you can exchange the dark squared bishops. If not, better not to play. After the exchange of the dark squared bishops, black has really excellent play, because the knights have really great squares like c5. The knight from e8 can go to g7 and f5, then targeting e3 and d4 with really great play. Later on, black can play king h8, rook g8, start pushing the g pawn to play g4, open the king side, and start direct attack against white's king. This line, I think, perfectly illustrates the long-term strategic potential of black's position in the structures after a pawn has arrived on d5. We see how, first of all, black secured the queen side, and second, how he advances on the king side, and the strategically very important exchange of the dark squared bishops, and further the advance on the king side. So this concludes the analysis of the move bishop e3. Let's move to other 8 moves. g4. Like I said, you shouldn't really be surprised by moves like g4, h4, but this one is just not that good. Okay, the immediate threat is obviously g5, so black must prevent that by playing h6, and then play follows along the same lines: bishop e3, bishop e6, yeah, controlling d5, intending knight d7. It not only attempts to finish development, but also when g4 has been playing, the move d5 is a threat because white has weakened his king side. Yeah? So bishop f3 prevents d5, and now knight d7, finishing development and already starting thinking about counterplay. Rook c8, b5, knight b6, typical Najdorf moves. Queen e2. Okay, we start to see the idea behind white's play. He wants to castle queen side, yeah, and then start maybe pushing h4, g5 on the king side. And now knight b6. In a way, a problem move, but not really a serious one, because the moves students have tried are both okay, like b5 or queen c7. They are both okay, even though another move students have tried, short castle, is not okay, because simply it doesn't make much sense to castle into the storm. White showed his aggressive intentions by playing g4. He will continue with h4, g5, so why castle into the storm? I prefer the move knight b6 because it creates the immediate threat of knight c4. In the Najdorf, and generally in the Sicilian, if black can manage to exchange the dark squared bishop, white's dark squared bishop for a knight, like for example knight c4, knight e6, his unopposed dark squared bishop can in the long term become very, very strong. So it is always a favorable exchange for black, this exchange of the knight for a dark squared bishops. Of course, we have seen lines when white does this voluntarily, but generally speaking, especially in these types of positions with long castle and attacks, this bishop is a very valuable piece. Therefore, knight b6 with the threat of knight c4. And obviously black has a very good game here. Then knight lands on c4, the rook can come to c8, b5, a5, queen c7, all these typical Najdorf moves can happen, even b4 hitting the knight on c3. Very, very comfortable play. Similarly, but objectively probably better, is the move h4 immediately. Again, a recent attempt. And now, try not to, or rather try to understand the differences between this and the position with bishop e3, bishop e6 inserted. In that position we play the move h5, but we don't. We play bishop e6, the normal developing move, controlling d5. The reason being that if we go h5 again, then the bishop on c1 doesn't need to stop on e3 first, it can go to g5 immediately. And white has saved the tempo. It may not amount to much, but why concede and allow this? Yeah? Simply better not to. So bishop e6. Again, d5 is always a threat when this construction happens. Knight f6, bishop e6. And now the idea of, we see white's idea, which was to play f4. In a way, it forced the bishop come to e6, and now f4. The threat is f5, so black is forced to take. Okay, ef, bishop f4, and now knight c6. Normally in the knight goes to d7, but here it's different because, okay, first of all, in d7, d6 pawn is hanging. And from c6, the knight can also go to b4, yeah, to support the d5 push. So this is another idea to have in mind. With the knight on c6, black has finished the development of of the light pieces, and already is threatening d5. He's threatening d5 because white's king is still stuck in the center. Yeah. So white is trying to prevent it by playing queen d3. Now queen d2, we will see in a while why queen d3 stops d5, but queen d2 doesn't, because d5 is now already possible. Exchanging there is just great for black after knight d5, so long castle. Okay, now d5 is under pressure, so d4, queen e3, and now the only move for black, but one that suffices, queen c8. Okay, the queen was attacked, so he has to move. The only decent square is c8. But already this is great, because after exchanging on e4, black can then continue with castle, with bishop f5. There are ideas like knight b4, and black has really good piece play in this open position. Now, what's the difference with queen d3? Well, the difference is that d5 now can be met by the move queen g3. And g7 is attacked, and then long castle can happen, and there would be pin along the d file. But now, on the other hand, we see the benefits of the knight c6 move, which is the move knight b4, hitting the queen and c2, forcing queen d2, and now again d5. Yeah, you see now again black how black liberates his play. Now the point is that a3, which hits the knight, yeah, is met by the only move d4. Yeah, d4, counter-attacking. The point being that after ab, dc, bc, knight e4, black has achieved a pretty favorable exchange of pawns. The d6 pawn for the e4 pawn, and along the way destroying white's queenside structure. And after, let's say, queen e3, knight f6, attacking the queen, queen c8 again is in the other line. It's already a great position for black, who will have the safer king after short castle, whereas white's king can never be really safe. Yeah, even short castle has his position would be weakened there by the move h4. So black here has a long-term advantage of the safer king. So this wraps up the analysis of the alternatives on move 8. Yeah, so going back to the traditionally main move, short castle, which is met by, obviously, short castle by black, keeping it flexible. The bishop stays on c8 for a while. It can go to e6, but in some lines, as we will see, it can also go to b7. Again, position where white has the wide choice here. Yeah, I have taken bishop e3 as the, you could say, sort of main line, but basically there are many possible plans for white in this position. Let's start with the move king h1, but before noting that, it's worth saying that the move bishop f3 does not really have an independent value, because after bishop e6, a4, the play transposes to the line with a4, which we will analyze later on. Now, king h1, this is a very deep move. It's a useful move, removing the king from the g1 a7 diagonal, which is always a sensitive one for the king when the f-pawn moves, and also a waiting move. It discourages both black's typical moves, you could say, in this position, which are the moves bishop e6 and b5. Now, bishop e6 is met by f4, so we see the idea. If ef, the bishop comes from c1 to f4 in one go, and the king has been already removed on h1. It has been removed from the open diagonal. So this obviously favors white. White has made two useful things: gain the tempo by playing bishop f4 in one move and remove the king. So it discourages bishop e6 and also discourages b5, which can be met by a4, b4, knight d5, and then the complications are in white's favor. This has been established in the late 90s already. However, black can also respond with an equally deep move, which is the move b6. Now, if b5 doesn't work, then why not play just b6 and prepare the development of the bishop on b7 if e6 is not available. Now, there are two ways here for white. One is the move bishop e3, and the other is the move f3. Now, white can start with a4 as well, but after bishop b7 hitting the pawn on e4, f3, knight c6, we will have a transposition. Yeah? And now bishop b7. Now, this is a curious thing, and I would like to thank the students for this one. It's because in this position they have tried the rather logical, I would say, move bishop e6, which makes perfect sense if you look at it, because by playing f3, white basically denounces the idea of to play f4, so then the question is, why not put the bishop on e6, since f3 blunts the bishop on b7, so why not put it on e6? It's a perfectly viable move and quite a interesting novelty, I would say, so well done to the students who thought logically and came up with the move bishop e6 here. Definitely a move that needs to be explored further. With that being said, nothing wrong with bishop b7, even though it is blunted by f3, it actually, from b7, aids the push d5. Yeah? So, a4. Again, we have a transposition. If bishop e3, b5, we have a transposition to the bishop e3 line instead of f3. So, a4, and now, knight c6. Again, the prompt is the white's last move, a4. It weakens b4, so the knight comes from c6 to b4 to support d5. Of course, it's logical and not surprising that many students have played the move knight d7, which is the typical Najdorf move and the most common square for the knight in the Najdorf. But in this case, take the hint from white's last move, a4, the knight comes to c6 and then to b4 to support the d5 push. Bishop g5. Again, we see fight for the d5 square. So the bishop on g5 wants to eliminate the knight on f6, that is controlling the d5 square. But black also fights for it by playing knight b4. Yeah, the knight is very active on b4. It controls, attacks in a way c2, and also controls d5, supports the d5 push. And now a nice move by white, knight b1. Immediately addressing the problem of the knight on b4. It's an annoying knight. Yeah, that does so many things. c2, d5. So white is playing knight d2 with the idea of playing c3, pushing it backwards. And then maybe this knight will come to a3, maybe c2, e3, various ideas. So c3 is threatened. Now a5. Not a move you would often play in the Najdorf without a pawn on d5, please note that. But here it's important, it's necessary because the knight wants to drop back to a6 and then possibly go to either c5 or c7. Note that from c7 is very useful, keeps an eye on the weakened b5 square and also still supports d5. So c3, knight a6. The threat is still to push d5. Bear in mind that the d5 square is well in black's control. So d5 is always a threat here. So the only move for white to prevent it is to push c4. And now we have some sort of a Maróczy structure with e4, c4 for white. But one in which it is very important to exchange the dark squared bishops. Now for black that is doubly important because his own dark squared bishop is sort of passive. And secondly, white's dark squared bishop is extremely important because it covers the weakened dark squares. If you can see, b4, c5, d4 are all very nice squares for black's knights, and eliminating the dark squared bishop, white's dark squared bishop, will weaken them even further. The difference here being that white's good squares for the knight d5 and b5 can easily be controlled by the remaining light squared bishop by putting it on c6, and whenever a knight comes there it can be eliminated, which cannot be said for white's light squared bishop, which is passive in these Maróczy structures. Therefore, black's next move should not come as a surprise. Knight h5, immediately addressing the important positional issue. once you understand the underlying logic behind the move, you should have no problem playing it, because students have tried the move knight c5, but it's just too early for that. It is important to exchange the dark squared bishop, as I explained. Yeah? Now, after knight h5, white has a choice to exchange, which is definitely in black's favor, because it also adds the f4 square as a nice square for a knight, or to go back, bishop e3. Yeah? But then black can continue with ideas later on, not now, okay, or maybe even now, bishop g5, trying to harass that bishop, and then the knight will come to f4, the knight to c5, f5 can happen, all with very, very good play. So this is a very, very promising middle game position for black. The move bishop e3 here is a different one. White is waiting for black to go bishop b7, okay, to attack e4, and after f3 he still intends to maybe go a4 and in a way control black's queenside activity. I remember once reading, actually it was in Bronstein's book on the 1953 Zurich candidates, when he was talking about the Najdorf position after bishop e2, e5, knight b3, and then he was explaining that white has quite a few setups involving the a and f pawn. So he said white can play f4 and leave the pawn on a2. White can play f3 and leave the pawn on a2. He can play a4 and f4. He can play a4 and f3. He can play a3 and f3, a3 and f4. So all these combinations of the pawns of the f and a pawns are possible. And it's funny that even back then, when he was writing that book, Bronstein said that he personally preferred the pawns on a4 and f3. And modern practice has often confirmed his intuition in this case. And here we see white actually trying to put the pawns as Bronstein suggested, by playing a4, f3 and a4. Understood this, you already know what black plays next, b5, preventing a4. Therefore, don't play the automatic move knight d7, which would allow the Bronstein setup by playing a4 with a very comfortable position for white, because black is pretty much devoid of counterplay in that position. It's worth perhaps pausing and considering that, to see that and try to even visually recognize a position where black is devoid of counterplay. So knight d7, a4. So there is no b5, there is no d5, there is no pressure on e4. And this is a position that, the type of position that needs to be avoided. So b5. But white, by defending the e4 pawn, he's ready to undermine that pawn, and he plays a4. And after b4, he goes forward knight d5. Note that if he goes here, if he doesn't go a4, if he goes a3, in Bronstein's terminology, a3, f3, this is already a huge improvement for black with the pawn on b5, because he has the maneuver knight d7, knight b6, from where the knight can come to c4 or supports d5, very comfortable. Now you see why f3, a3 is not really a good combination. f3, a4, much better, but in this concrete case, black has good counterplay. Because after b4, knight d5, ed, we have managed to force white to put a pawn on d5. Now the position is a bit different, because black's queenside structure is different. The pawn is on b4 rather than on b6 or b7, and this makes it easier for white to open the queenside by playing c3. Still, even if this happens after bc, bc, black will be able to either establish a blockade on c5, which will be very good. He will also try to exchange the bishops by bishop g5, or in case white somehow manages to push c5 himself after dc, the position will be too open and too simplified, so that the past d pawn to have any real significance. So the analysis will show this. Okay, knight d7, finishing development and also controlling the b6 and c5 squares, which are important squares on the queen side c3. Obviously, that's the only way for white to create some play in this position. Otherwise, black will continue bishop g5, f5, and so on. Be very, very good play. So bc, bc, and now bishop g5. Immediately trying to exchange the bishop. A5 is a move that students have tried and one that shows good understanding, because students have recognized that one of white's strategic ideas is to push a5 and fix black's queen side by fixing the b6 square and also the a6 pawn. So the bishop on e2 is useful by hitting it, and then also the bishop on b7 is rather passive. So a5 shows good understanding, but the move knight c5 really doesn't, because then after knight c5 dc5, black has simply ruined his structure. Still, the best move is bishop g5, because it gains the tempo by wanting to exchange the bishops, which is strategically favorable for him. And also, the point being that after bishop f2, the bishop is active and controls the important c1 square, which makes it impossible for white to use the c file to support the c4 c5 push. So by controlling that square, black can continue by queen c7, attacking c3, and after c4 play the important move a5. So again, the move a5 a few moves before showed good understanding, but from a concrete point of view, it was better to make a couple of active moves first. Bishop g5, trying to force a favorable exchange. Queen c7, connecting the rooks, hitting c3. And after c4, only now play a5. This has the additional benefit that after c4, the bishop does not have access to the b5 square. So a5 also could have allowed bishop b5 in some cases. But once the pawn has arrived on c4, this is no longer the case. So now c5. White must try to go forward, because otherwise black is just doing great. He can play bishop a6, put the rook on b8, put the rook on b4, and just create very, very unpleasant counterplay on the queen side. The long-term plan of f5 and e4 also stands, but just more things are happening on the queen side here. So black will more likely play on the queen side in this manner: bishop a6, rook b8, rook b4. And so on. Note the very important role of the bishop on g5 that controls the c1 square, which white would gladly use for the rook. Oops. But that is not really possible now. Therefore c5, and this is more forcing, so it needs more consideration. Okay, takes knight c5, dc5, d6. White managed to create a passed pawn, but this pawn is not really going anywhere. Bishop c5 and bishop c6. Great position for black. The d6 pawn is not going anywhere. It requires defense. The a4 pawn also requires defense, because the bishop and the queen are eyeing it. And also, black has a very, theoretically speaking, he even has the better structure, because he has 2 pawn islands as opposed to white's 3. And if he wants to, he can also push e4, supported by f5 or not, depending, e4, to prolong the diagonal of the light squared bishop. So this is already a very, very good position for black. So king h1, very popular in the late 90s, early 90s, but already largely defanged. Another possibility, queen d3. We saw the idea in the position after before castling, bishop e3, bishop e6, and queen d3. Here, the difference is that white has a short castle, but the bishop is still on c1, and this allows for an additional possibility. After the natural, normal move, bishop e6, yeah, the twist is bishop d2. Now, if you look at it, and if you're careful, you will see white's idea. The idea is to jump knight d5, and when the knight comes to d5. White will immediately have control over the a5 square and will immediately threaten the strategically favorable move knight a5. So this is in a way subtle move. But then again, if you have understood the typical reactions to this knight d5 and what happens on the queen side with the a5 square and so on, you should be alert enough and react properly. Just to note, knight d5 immediately is harmless because here even black can take advantage of the fact that the knight is still on b8, so he can take with the knight, yeah, and play bishop c8, preserving the bishop pair, and then easy play. f5, knight d7, knight f6, or bishop f6, f4, e4, put a knight on e5, play bishop g5, exchange the dark squared bishops. All very smooth play, whereas on the queen side we already know b6, a5 will come at some point with really good play. So bishop d2 is the subtle move. Obviously black should continue with development knight d7, and after knight d5, okay, again forced to take with the bishop because taking with the knight loses the bishop, so bishop d5, e5, and this is the critical moment. The bishop on d2 and knight on b3, the threat is knight a5, and obviously the move to play is a5. I attribute the moves knight b6 and queen b8, which have been played by some students, to some sort of confusion, because as we will see, queen b8 is a nice move, but in another line which allows the maneuver bishop d8, but here it just doesn't work because the knight comes to a5, and also knight b6, yeah, it attacks d5 but then allows bishop a5 with an awkward pin. So whereas the moves do have some idea, the move to play obviously is the move a5, because once understood what the threat is, to put the piece on a5, a5 is basically the move to make. And after a4, b6, standard play. By now it should be standard, since we have seen it on more than one occasion. The immediate threat is to go knight c5, and if knight c5, bc, completely solidifying the whole structure on the queen side. So let's say c4, knight c5, knight c5, bc5, and this is already a great position. Okay, rook can come to b8. The b2 pawn is backward, so the queen side is safe, and now black can start play on the king side. The knight can move f5, and then according to circumstances, bishop g5 is always the move to remember, to exchange the dark squared bishops, or the bishop. If not, the bishop can come to f6, and then e4 can be played, and a counterplay against b2 can happen. As usual, a very rich play for black. Note that the pair of bishops here is completely useless because the position is relatively closed, and the potential for pawn play in this position belongs with black, because he can easily advance his own majority, whereas the same cannot be said for white. In fact, he has a pretty weak structure on the queen side because of the backward b pawn. So queen d3, bishop d2 idea can easily be parried. a4. This used to be in the 60s especially, and 70s, this used to be probably the most common move. Useful move by all means, preventing b5 forever, more or less, and then seeing what to do next. Bishop e6 is the normal developing move, and now we will look at the modern treatment of the a4 line, which is the move bishop f3. In the past, people have played the move f4, so we see Bronstein's now setup of a4, f4. But this again is too loosening from white's perspective, and after ef4, it does allow white to come to f4 in one move, but it also allows black to speed up his development. After bishop f4, knight c6, again not d7 because d6 is hanging, king h1, the typical prophylactic move, now is met by d5. It's just that black's development was so quick that he manages to push through d5. It is possible to continue in a more, let's say, or you could say less direct way by playing knight e5. Normally these positions with the pawns on e4 and d6 are very comfortable for black. Both pawns are weak, you could say not weak but isolated. But then again, black's one is more close to his pieces and easier to defend, and also the e5 square is very important factor in this position. So the knight can come to e5, the other one to d7, yeah, and then or maybe e8 defending d6 and then allowing for bishop g5, exchanging the dark squared bishops, and so on and so on. But then again, there is no need for that because d5 just equalizes on the spot. Of course, exchanging there just simplifies things, and if e5, knight d7. It's also possible to play knight e4, but I just wanted to show that knight d5, knight e5, knight e7, queen e7. At first sight, it may appear that the position is open and white has a pair of bishops, but here it is the main factor actually is the knight on e5. You could say yes, white has a pair of bishops, but how is the bishop on e2 better than the knight on e5? In fact, the knight on e5 dominates the bishop on e2, and whenever the bishop comes out to f3 or d3, it can be eliminated, and then the position is just equal with opposite colored bishops. So the rooks will come to d8, e8 with really excellent central control for black. So therefore this odd line with f4 nowadays is basically completely harmless. And therefore white came up with a new positional plan, which is the move bishop f3. It's a deep move because it allows for several regroupings by white. Let's talk briefly about white's ideas here. The bishop on f3 defends e4 and also increases control over d5. White will often play rook e1. The bishop on c1 can come to e3. The queen can come to d2, allowing for maybe a rook on d1 and pressurizing d6. And then what is important is what happens with the knight on b3. Now the knight on b3 has two possible routes. One is to go knight d2, f1, and then either g3 or e3. Ideally, that would be ideal for white to end up with a knight on e3 and absolute control over d5. And the alternative is to go c1, e2, g3, eyeing the f5 square. So these are the ideas that white is operating with in this modern treatment with bishop f3. Now let's see how the game develops. Knight d7, the automatic move, finishing development. Yes. And now bishop e3. What is good from black's perspective here is that the lines I suggested are rather special in a way that they include this very nice, I would say, maneuver of queen b8, followed by bishop d8, and then either bishop b6 or bishop a5. This is illustrated in the line rook e1, queen b8. So since it's a particular move, rarely seen in the other lines, I think it makes it easier to remember. The idea again is to activate the bishop, also liberates c8 for the rook. The move bishop e3 prevents it, and we will see shortly why. First of all, let's take a look of the idea, how it works in practice. Queen b8. After bishop d8, the maneuver anticipates the moving of the knight from b3. So when the knight moves from b3, the bishop can come to a5, attacking the knight on c3, and again you see the underlying fight for the d5 square. The bishop from a5 attacks the knight on c3, which in turn controls the d5 square. So really a lot in the Najdorf depends on that control of the d5 square and the pieces controlling. Now let's see how what happens when black manages to implement his plan fully. Knight d2 makes sense, obviously. The idea is knight f1, knight e3. Yeah, but then we see the idea bishop d8, knight f1. If a5, trying to prevent bishop a5, then b6 or b5 opens up the queen side. So knight f1, and now bishop a5. The bishop is very active there, yeah? Wants to take on c3, destroy the structure. So bishop d2 and queen c7. And this is already great play. Great play for black. The queen can come to c6. Bishop c3 is always an option, even without destroying the structure. Because the point is, when the queen comes to c6 and the knight on c5, black will be attacking 3 times the pawn on e4. And the maneuver knight e3 will not be really viable. This has been played on more than one occasion by Vachir Lagrave, and he actually used this idea of bishop c3, knight c5 attacking the pawn on e4. Also note that by eliminating the knight on c3, black has really excellent control over the d5 square. So this is what happens when white allows black to implement the plan by playing knight d2. The move bishop e3 is more aware, showing more awareness for black's plan of bishop d8. The point being that if bishop goes to d8, white is ready to play queen d2 and rook d1, hitting the pawn on d6. So therefore, it's a prophylactic move, preventing the idea of bishop d8, of the bishop transfer. So black understands this. Okay, so he doesn't embark on the maneuver, but just plays rook c8, taking advantage of another useful idea of the queen b8 move, which elongated, the 8th rank, so the rook can be put on the c file. Yeah? Note that the bishop d8 maneuver is still on the cards if white allows it. So, for example, white can allow it by playing a5, because the point is that now bishop d8 is just in time. Bishop d8, queen d2, but now already b5 or b6. ab, bishop b6, and already excellent play. The bishops will be exchanged, and then which is generally always favorable for black in these structures. So queen d2, still threatening rook d1 in case the bishop moves, and now white does threaten a5 because bishop d8, rook d1 will attack the pawn, and black must be aware of it, understand it, and play the move b6, preventing a5. And this is a complex middle game position where black is actually doing quite all right. A maneuver to have in mind in this position is the maneuver rook a7, rook c7. To double on the c file, and then perhaps continue with b5 further on. So this is a complex middle game position, but black has his counterplay here. So this was the move rook e1, which we analyzed, and where we saw this idea of queen b8. Now let's go to the move bishop e3. Now we understood the idea. Now if queen b8, then bishop d2. Queen d2, and the rook will come immediately from f1 to d1, not to e1, and white will have pressure against the d6 pawn. Therefore, the idea of queen b8 here doesn't really work. So the queen goes to the natural square of c7. And now a5. Okay, a move that will allow us to see how black's counterplay develops on the queen side in this line. The move rook e1 is possible, and you could say in a way maybe white managed to trick black by playing bishop e3 first and not rook e1 first, circumventing the idea of queen b8, as we saw in rook e1 first, queen b8. But still, after rook fc8, black is perfectly fine. What is curious in these positions is that they start to resemble in a way, okay, it's far-fetched, but still bear with me, sort of a Zugzwang for white. And I'll explain why. Both sides have finished development. And now the only thing white needs to decide is whether to push a5 or not, and what to do with the queen. However, both moves here they have their drawbacks. a5 allows b6 or b5 with the opening of the queen side. Queen d2 allows the move knight b6 with the threat of knight c4. So this shows that white is short of constructive moves and ideas in this position. And this is underlined in the following moves. h3. Yeah, you could say generally good move, yeah, opening a luft and so on. But when black continues with h6, we have the same position again, and white has the same problems. What to do? Queen d2 runs into knight b6, a5 runs into b6 or b5, opening up the queen side. So it pays to pause a bit in this position and consider this, because it's in a way a funny situation. Yeah, both sides are developed, but then white is short of constructive ideas. An idea can be knight c1, yeah, with the maneuver I mentioned, knight goes to e2 or g3, or d3 b4, perhaps, not very likely, but it introduces some constructive ideas. Sometimes knight a2 b4, okay? But then again, with the knight not controlling a5, and the first rank being blocked by the knight, so the maneuver queen d2, rook d1 is slow, bishop d8 is a good idea. And after knight e2, e2, queen b8. And the bishop comes out to a5. So knight g3, bishop a5. So the fact that you could say white managed to trick black by playing bishop e3 first and rook e1, forcing the queen to c7, does not really eliminate the whole idea of bishop d8, bishop a5. As you can see, it can also happen at a later stage. So this is a rather peculiar line, which I think is shows the roadblock, you could say, white can run into. Yeah, you could say white put all his pieces in a very harmonious way, controlling the d5, b5 breaks and so on, but then what? The question is, then what? And you can see that whatever white tries to do then allows some sort of counterplay by black. So it's important to be patient and wait for prompts by white in order to determine what to do next. So going back to the move a5 instead of rook e1, and here we see the counterplay black is creating by after a5 and after a b6, knight b6. This is already very smooth for black. The knight comes to c4, the rook can come to b8, open files, very active play. Even the a pawn after knight c4, the a pawn can be included in the attack by a5, a4 if possible. Yeah? For example, knight a5, knight c4, forcing the exchange, takes, rook e1, rook b8. Already very great play. b3 weakens the c3 knight, so not really possible. And then a5, a4 with pressure on the b file. Please note that in spite of all this happening, yeah, black still continues to have control over the d5 square. So this is the modern treatment of the a4 move, but as we saw, one that with relatively subtle play, black can deal with relatively easily. Rook e1 is another possibility on move 9. Nowadays it's played most likely with a transposition to the bishop f3, a4 lines that we just looked at. Because after bishop a6, bishop e6, bishop f1 is the old plan from the, I'd say, 80s. But one that isn't popular anymore. Like I said, nowadays, if you see the move, it will most likely be connected with the moves a4 or bishop f3. Yeah, which will see a transposition to what we just looked at. With that being said, okay, let's still take a look at the old plan, bishop f1, because it's still sort of characteristic. Because after knight d7, okay, continuing development, knight d5, this is white's idea. The move from the rook from e1 controls e4, or defends e4, and allows for knight d5. Now, white is accepting the fact that after the exchange there, a pawn will arrive there on d5, but his idea is to start pushing on the queen side. But we already saw how, first of all, how black can deal with that, and second, I will show this line to to demonstrate that in this particular line, even allowing a white pawn on a5 is not the end of the world, first of all, and second, to show the counterplay black can obtain. So knight d5. Okay, here black has a choice, so he chooses to keep the bishop pair. So knight d5, e5, bishop f5, a4, rook c8 first, hitting c2. Okay, c3, and now I'm sure that by now you know the move a5 would be the typical normal one, etc. Yeah? But like I said, here I would like to show that even allowing a5 is not the end of the world in this particular line, and in most of the lines, to be honest. But still, it always in the other lines it's better to stop it. So the move bishop g6. The move liberates the f pawn. So the black wants to continue with f5 and so on. Yeah. So a5, and now a5, f5. Now the strategic idea is bishop g5, and also the knight can come to f6 and then continue with e4, f4 maybe, with the attack on the king side. What is worth noting here is that even though white managed to push a5, his pieces are relatively passive. All of them, almost all of them, are on the first rank. And bishop e3 is not really an option now because f4 will push it backwards. So he can't really support his queenside attack. So c4, c5 is not coming anytime soon because c5 is well defended. The knight on b3 cannot effectively be moved to allow for c4, b4. So what matters here is the position of the pieces. Whites are passive, so he cannot really take advantage of the fact that he managed to put the pawn on a5. This is why I wanted to show this position. That sometimes even allowing a5 is not scary because white's pieces cannot support the queenside attack. So an attempt to stop black's expansion is to play f4. It also aims to secure the e3 square for the bishop, but here black has a nice pawn sacrifice at his disposal, knight f6. Okay, he wants to jump to e4 and so on. Okay, so the point being that takes, bishop d6 is very, in a way, similar to the martial attack. Yeah, the rook is now attacked, and if it goes back, knight g4, and this is already a winning attack. There are h2 is hanging. There are after g3, knight h2 can be a good sacrifice. The queen can come to h4, and so on. So this is already a winning attack. Again, note how white's pieces are all passive, whereas black is already very, very aggressive and already obtains excellent attack. Therefore, this old plan with rook e1, bishop f1 is not really seen nowadays. Bishop g5. Now, we already saw this idea without the short castle. When white was trying to castle long and then play g3, f4 and create something on the king side. With short castle, we can safely say it's harmless. Bishop e6, we have the same reaction. The idea is to connect by knight d7. So white must take, and now knight d5. Okay, we see the same setup by white as in some other lines, but then this is harmless because, as we saw in the knight f3 line, yeah, black can play effectively around this knight on d5. So bishop g5, the typical move, not possible in the lines with knight f3, but here very much possible and also desirable because the bishop is very active here, controlling the c1 square and also the e3 square. So queen d3 and now knight d7. Flexible move, also allowing maybe for knight b6, knight f6 later on and so on. Even though in this line black is content by just controlling the d5 square and the d5 knight and playing around it. The main counterplay is based around the move f5, very similar to the Sveshnikov Sicilian. So rook d1, typical normal play by white, doubling on the d file and so on, but this leads nowhere because white would like to both have his cake and eat it, because he would like to have the knight on d5, which is controlling a lot of squares and is a dominating piece, but he would also like to remove it to attack d6. But then again, he can't have both, obviously. And here the move rook c8. It's not only an automatic developing move, it's also a move with an idea. And the idea is to have the possibility of rook c6 to defend the pawn on d6 if required. So not to be forced to go back with the bishop to e7. The bishop would like to stay there on g5. So the move rook c8 introduces this idea of rook c6 to defend the pawn. Some students have tried to play king h8 or f5 immediately, but as I explained, okay, rook c8 is in a way the last preparatory move, making sure d6 is safe forever because of the rook c6 idea, and then black can start preparing his counterplay based on f5. So after c3, king h8. Again, some students have struggled with king h8, having tried to play f5 immediately, which is fine, I suppose, but in general, in chess, it's better to prepare first, and then, if you can, and then follow up on your idea. b5 is also a possible move, but I just feel that here black's counterplay should be more based around f5. Okay, b5, like I said, normal move, fine, nothing wrong with it. But I just think that king h8, and then with f5, sometimes even held by g6, f5, if with the idea of to take with a pawn on f5, like ef, gf, and then use the g file for an attack. I think it's more, I would say, unpleasant for white. Not exposing the queen side by b5, allowing maybe for some a4 undermining moves, and just play king h8 and start kingside play. And this shows this plan. Okay, shows the not really good prospects white has after this move bishop g5. So going back to move bishop e3. Yeah, bishop e3, as we said. Okay, here bishop e3, the flexible move, and also now it's actually an introduction to the so-called Karpov plan. Okay, which we will analyze now. So bishop e6, the typical normal move in these structures. Yeah, finishing development, and now queen d2. And this is the start of the Karpov plan or Karpov system. He used it in the early 80s to win quite a few memorable and classical, you could say, games. Obviously became very popular, but with the passage of time, a lot of practical tests and analysis, black managed to find pretty good ways to deal with this plan. Now let's explain what white's plan actually is. So he will go most likely for the preferred Bronstein setup of a4, f3. Okay, then he has a choice. The rook on f1 will come either to d1 or c1. Then the knight will jump to d5. After an exchange there, ed5 will happen, but white will make sure that he gets in a5. And then with the rook on c1 in particular, he will start pushing c4, b4, and c5. Similarly, it can happen with the rook on d1. Additional ideas for white are, especially with the rook on d1, the maneuver knight c1, knight a2, knight b4, further increasing the control over d5. So as you can see, it's a very deep plan. It's a very deep plan. And if allowed, white will definitely have an advantage. So now let's take a look how black deals with this plan. Knight d7, okay, continuing development for the time being. a4, preventing b5, and now rook c8. Now the idea is to go knight b6, knight c4. Yeah? So white prevents it by a5. Okay, and now queen c7. So by a5, the pawn is already where white wants it. Yeah, so now he's ready, maybe to go rook somewhere, if d1 c1, put the knight on d5, the pawn will land on d5, but then very quickly c4 and knight maybe move and b4 and so on. It can become very, very dangerous. Also note that with the rook already on c8, opening up the queen side by moving the b pawn exposes the a6 pawn, which will be attacked both by the bishop on e2 and rook on a1. So this is rarely possible for black in this line. So queen c7. In a way, a problem move queen c7, because students have tried to play knight c5 immediately, which is theoretically perfectly fine. But as I said before, why not just prepare first? The move queen c7 also in a way pins down the knight on c3 because of the weakness of the c2 pawn. And now we come to the position where white can choose which of the two versions of the Karpov plan to implement. One is with the rook on d1 and the other one is with the rook on c1. And in fact, this was rook fc1 was the original Karpov plan. It's the more direct of the two because immediately the threat is to come knight d5 and follow up with c4. Once black understands this, okay, the move to play is knight c5. So black must start this activity first. Knight c5, forcing the exchange, knight c5 and dc5. And now we have a transformation of the structure. Now we have a symmetrical structure, and which is okay, needs some explanations. If the structure remains like this, black will ideally play c4, so push the move to c4, push the pawn to c4, which does two very important things. First, it prevents white from establishing a piece on c4, like for example by b3 and bishop c4, for example. And second, activates the bishop on e7, allowing for the strategically favorable exchange by bishop c5, or for the move bishop b4, which not only pins the knight but also attacks the pawn on a4. So let's see how play develops with with this development if the structure remains as it is. Alternatively, white can decide to change the structure by jumping knight d5, but then after bishop d5, vd5, bishop d6, black has very, very good play, as we will see shortly. First of all, let's see how things develop if the structure remains symmetrical after, let's say, f3, rook d8 first, attacking the queen, getting the rook on the open file before pushing c4. Yeah? So the threat is either bishop c5 or bishop b4. Okay, and white prevents both by playing knight a4. So here the fight is for the dark squares, bishop on b6 and c5. Note that bishop b6 does not lose an exchange because bishop c5 would be a check and it would force the exchange of the bishops. So knight a4. Okay, and now knight d7. So the knight covers both these vulnerable squares. King h8, king h1, sorry, removing the queen for the open diagonal. And now queen b8. Now, some students have made the mistake of playing knight c5, which is a mistake, obviously, because it allows knight b6. Here, what is important is to control that knight on a4, not exchange it, because it's on the rim, so no need to exchange it, but control it. By controlling it, I mean controlling the squares where it can get to c5 and b6. The move queen b8 removes the queen from the possible skewer. Yeah, after knight b6, bishop b6, for example, since there is no check on c5. And also, it allows for a move like rook c6, for example, yeah? Controlling further b6. Yeah? And also introduces other ideas. Yeah? Once the queen is removed, okay, black can maybe try the idea of h6, bishop g5, trying to favorably exchange the dark squared bishops, or activating the bishop on the c1h6 diagonal. And ultimately, if the position allows it, black can try some active counterplay by pushing f5. So all these ideas, rook c6, h6, bishop g5, f5 are possible in this position. And black has normally in a position, if you have a lot of ideas, that means that your position is good. So already like 3 relatively constructive ideas show that black has good play in this position. And on the other hand, it's not quite clear what constructive ideas white has in this position, because he also needs to be careful. I mean, the pawn on a5 can become vulnerable if bishop b4 is allowed. Then again, the knight must stay on a4 not to allow bishop c5 or knight c5. So white's pieces are sort of also limited in their movements. Now let's see what happens if white decides to jump to d5. Okay, this exchange is forced, and now bishop d6. Now we have another transformation. So far we have looked at positions where on d6 we had a black pawn and the bishop was on d7. Here we had a pawn on c5 and a bishop on d6. Also, not to be underestimated, white's pawn is on a5. So what is the difference here? The pawn on c5 actually helps black in stopping white's queenside expansion. It did allow white a passed, sometimes even protected passed pawn by playing c4 on d5, but that pawn is not going anywhere. The bishop will probably stay forever on d6, so it's well blockaded, which means that black is safe from queenside attack. b4 can also almost never happen because the bishop on d6 also controls b4 one more time. On the other hand, black still has his central and kingside majority. So the logical plan is to move the knight and then start pushing f5, e4. Sometimes even f4, depends. Sometimes even the knight may not move. Even e4 immediately can be an idea. Sometimes supported by a rook. Let's say rook e8, e4. Then the pawn on f7 stays at home, and then the knight can go knight d7, knight d5. So we see actually how this bishop now is more active on d6 when e4 is played, immediately hitting h2. And this adds more edge to black's kingside and central activity. So let's make, for example, 2 more moves. Let's say c4, knight d7. Yeah? And now we see the idea. Okay, knight d7. Black is still not committing to f5. He can still go e4, knight e5 without pushing the f-pawn, but may as well decide to do so, f5 as well. So this is already, again, position can be deceptive, because if you look at it from white's perspective, pair of bishops and protected passed pawn. What more can you ask for? But if you look at the prospects of play, then you see that white is without them, whereas black has many options how to start his central and kingside play. Whether play rook e8 or not, e4 with or without f5, f5 with the idea of f4, putting the knight on e5, etc. So this is already a very, very good position for black. The third option on move 13 is the move bishop f3. Now this is flexible. Yeah, because the point is that instead of f3, now the bishop supports the e4 pawn and further controls the d5 square. In a way, mixes the ideas from the bishop f3 line we saw before, and also keeps the option of the rook from f1 coming to d1 or c1. Compared to the bishop f3 line, the rook from a8 has already come to c8. So this eliminates the ideas based on moving the b pawn and opening up the queen side, because a6 is hanging. So black is in a way forced to seek counterplay in another way. So rook fd8, the last preparatory move. As we will see later on, the idea is rather aggressive, because black is still, even in spite of the rook being on c8 and the relative weakness of the a6 pawn after b5, black is still not abandoning the idea of the b5 push. So now rook f c1, following the Karpov plan. It is possible to play rook fd1, but play will be the same, and we will see why the rook on c1 is more precise. The point is that after rook fd1, okay, if we just follow the same play from the line after rook fc1, b5, takes, and knight c4, we see the point. When the knight takes on b2, the rook will be attacked. So black will win a tempo. Note that knight b2 is possible even if white somehow defends it, because the knight on c3 will be hanging. Yeah. Therefore, rook fc1 is more precise. Nevertheless, b5 is still possible. Yeah, ab, knight b6. The knight is coming to c4, rook a6, knight c4. Black is a pawn down, but only temporary, because b2 will fall very soon. So, queen e1. And now it's important to be precise. Like I said, b2 will fall, so no need to take it immediately. Why not just prepare it by this subtle move rook e8? The point is that the rook is removed from this bishop b6 possible skewer. It does not lose material, so knight b2 is not bad per se. But after knight d5, because the c3 knight was attacked, knight d5, bishop d5, e5, bishop b6 is a threat. So black will be forced to lose tempo by queen d7. Again, this is an acceptable position for black, but it's just so much better to prepare it. Why not just play rook e8 first, and then embark on knight b2? Also, you never know, putting the rook on the same file as the queen may, even though the e file looks a bit clogged at the moment, it may offer some tactical chances in the future. So, let's illustrate the point. Knight b1, rook b1 and knight b2. The point is that the knight on c3 is hanging. This does not lose material, because after knight b5, okay, queen d7 attacks the knight. Okay, so now what is best for white is to take a pawn by playing knight d6, bishop d6, rook b2. But after rook c6, this is very, very good for black, simply because of the fact that c2 is actually weak. It's an extra pawn, but it's weak, and white's pieces will be forced to defend it. So the extra pawn will actually force white on the defensive to defend that extra pawn, and black in turn will actually have active play, easy on the c file. So this is very comfortable compensation for black in this line. So on move 12, let's see the move rook d1. This was the further evolution of the Karpov plan, because as I said, it started with rook fc1, but then it evolved to rook fd1, and the last move to appear was the move bishop f3, which we just looked at. So we already know rook fd1, black is ready and reacts in the same way as knight c5. Okay, e4 is hanging, so white must takes, and knight d5. Again, let's explore what happens if white does not jump. The strategical characteristics of both positions remain the same. Yeah? So if the position remains symmetrical, okay, let's say queen e1, moving the queen from the d file, okay, rook fd8, fighting for the d file, okay, rook d8, and now it's important to know how to take here. It's important to take with a queen. Now, why so? We saw that the main idea for black in this position is to push c4. Therefore, it is logical to keep the rook behind the pawn. As we know, c4 is necessary to allow for bishop c5 for the exchange of the bishops, or bishop b4 for the pin and attack on the a5 pawn. Taking with the rook, okay, it's more awkward, because after c4 the skewer bishop b6 will be an option for white. Now, if after queen d8, okay, white cannot play b3 to stop c4 because c4 will happen anyway. It was not the case with the rook on d8 because then c4 would lose an exchange to bishop b6. So just remembering these small tactical nuances will prompt you to take with the queen on d8. And after f3, okay, defending the e4 pawn and allowing for knight f4 ideas, we have c4. We explained why c4 is so important. So don't go knight d7, don't go knight bishop queen c7, because c4 is the important move to make in this structure. So the bishop c5, bishop b4 ideas are important. Knight a4, preventing both ideas, bishop a4, bishop c5, bishop b4. And again, the same reaction as in the other line. Okay, sorry, knight a4, knight d7. So here again, controlling the c5, b6 square. And after, let's say, rook d1, queen c7. We have a very, very similar position to the other one from the rook fc1 line. The queen now, an important difference is that with the exchange of one pair of rooks, the knight on a4 is not defended. So the queen, instead of dropping back to b8, can go to c6, hitting the knight. And still the other ideas remain: h6, bishop g5, f5 maybe eventually, and so on. So this is what happens after queen e1 and the symmetrical pawn structure. If knight d5, we have more or less the same. Knight d5, bishop d5, ed, bishop d6. Yeah, c4, knight d7. We have the same position, the rook being on d1 here instead of c1, but it doesn't change the characteristics and in the position. White does not have queenside play because c5 and b4 are well controlled, and black has very smooth kingside and central play with several ideas: pushing e4 with or without the help of f5, pushing f5, f4 maybe, putting a rook on e8, jumping with the knight on e5, with rich possibilities on the king side. This concludes our analysis of the positional bishop e2 line in the Najdorf. I hope I have managed to clarify and explain certain reactions, typical reactions, typical moves in these structures. And I hope now, with the help of this video, you have managed to improve your understanding of the Najdorf, not only the positions in this line, but also of the Najdorf in general. Thanks.